Welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're taking a look at all the twists and turns surrounding Nnamdi Kanu's trial.
Oh, yeah, this is a fascinating one.
For those who haven't been following every detail, just a quick reminder. Kanu is the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, IPOB. They're advocating for a separate Biafran nation in southeastern Nigeria.
Right, and this case really goes beyond just the courtroom, you know?
Yeah.
It taps into, like, decades of Nigerian politics.
Absolutely.
And the whole history of the Biafran independence movement.
Which has been a source of so much tension, conflict in Nigeria for so long.
Yeah, it's a really sensitive and complex issue.
And all of that context is really important when we look at, like, the recent developments in the trial. Like, back in September 2024, there was this, like, dramatic moment in the courtroom.
Oh, yeah, tell me about it.
So picture this. Kanu is there in court during a hearing. He just straight up addresses Justice Betanyako and demands she recuse herself.
Whoa, that's a bold move. I mean, recusal, that's not something you see every day. It's a pretty big deal, legally speaking.
For sure.
It means a judge is stepping back from a case because there might be a conflict of interest or, some kind of potential bias.
Basically, Kanu was accusing Nyako of not following a Supreme Court order.
Which is a huge claim.
Right, like, that's serious.
Definitely not something to be taken lightly.
So what happens? The judge actually agrees to recuse herself.
Wow. I mean, talk about a turning point.
It really felt like the whole trial was about to shift.
Yeah, where did it go from there?
Well, so the case file was sent to the chief judge to be signed to a new judge. But it's important to remember that this recusal happened kind of at the same time as another legal challenge.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
So a few months earlier, in June 2024, Kanu's lawyer, Aloy Ejimakor, filed an appeal, arguing that the federal high court didn't even have jurisdiction to try Kanu.
So hold on, they're saying it's not even the right court for this case.
Exactly.
What was their reasoning behind that?
Okay, so they listed like 7 different grounds for the appeal.
Yeah.
But the main issue is that they believe changes in the law, specifically the Terrorism Prevention and Prohibition Act of 2022, along with some other legal technicalities, mean that the court just isn't authorized to handle this trial.
Okay, that act specifically mentions terrorism, right? Is Kanu's team saying it's being misapplied here?
Yeah, basically they're arguing that the act is being used improperly in Kanu's case. And that's one reason why they say the court lacks jurisdiction.
So, like, they're saying he's not being charged appropriately under the law.
Right.
Gotcha.
And this is where it gets even more interesting. Remember how the case went to the chief judge?
Yeah.
Well, in January 2025, the file was sent right back to Justice Nyako.
What? I thought she recused herself.
She did. But the chief judge said that she was still the best fit for the case.
So, like, even with the recusal?
Even with the recusal.
Yeah.
Because 2 other judges had already recused themselves. And Nyako had been involved in the case since way back in 2015.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah, and the chief judge said that if Kanu still wanted Nyako off the case, he would have to file a formal motion.
Okay, so what did the government do during all this?
Well, they didn't just wait around. In December 2024, they requested a date to restart the trial.
Makes sense.
But Kanu's lawyer, Ejimakor, shot back with a letter saying that Nyako's recusal was still valid and that going forward with the trial would be unconstitutional.
Whoa, a total legal standoff.
It was like a high-stakes game of legal chess at this point. We have a judge who recused herself, a case bouncing between judges, lawyers challenging the court's authority, and the government pushing to move forward.
It's a lot to untangle.
Where does this leave us? Is the trial in limbo?
It really does feel like a legal maze.
It does. And that's exactly what we'll be dissecting in the next part of this deep dive.
That's so good.
We'll examine the potential consequences of this stalemate and explore what options are even on the table at this point. So stay tuned. Okay, so we left off with like this legal standoff. Kanu's team is saying the trial can't go on with Justice Nyako.
Yeah.
And the government is like, let's get this show on the road. It feels like everyone's digging in their heels here.
Yeah, it's a real stalemate.
What are the potential outcomes here? Could this just drag on forever?
Well, I mean, it's definitely possible. If Kanu's lawyers keep challenging Nyako's involvement, it could turn into this whole drawn-out legal battle, over which judge even has the right to be on the case.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't just delay the trial itself. It could really throw the entire process into question.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about the government? Are they just kind of sitting back and watching this happen?
Well, they're not exactly passive. They could try to force the issue, maybe by, scheduling a hearing and arguing that Kanu's objections are just delaying tactics.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, but it's a risky move. Kanu's lawyers would almost certainly fight back.
Right.
Which could lead to more appeals and even more legal back and forth. It could turn into a real mess.
So both sides are in a tough spot. They have to be really strategic about their next steps.
Exactly.
Because any move they make could backfire. And it's important to remember, this is not just some isolated legal case. This trial is directly connected to the Biafran separatist movement. And that has huge implications for Nigerian politics and stability.
Oh, absolutely. This whole trial is a flashpoint. You know, Kanu's supporters see him as this hero fighting for their cause,
Right.
while the government sees him as a threat to national unity.
It's like two totally different perspectives.
Yeah, and those deeply opposing views make the stakes incredibly high. The outcome of this trial could either inflame tensions or maybe even offer some path towards a resolution.
It's hard to say which way it will go. It's like we're talking about two completely different realities. How can one trial even begin to address such fundamentally different perspectives?
That's the challenge, isn't it? A guilty verdict could very easily lead to unrest among Kanu's supporters, potentially even violence. But then on the other hand, an acquittal might be seen as a huge victory for the Biafran movement, which could embolden them and lead to even greater challenges for the government.
Oh, wow.
And even a mistrial or a long delay could have unpredictable consequences.
It's like no matter what happens, there will be some serious repercussions.
Yeah.
This case is going to leave a mark on Nigeria one way or another.
Yeah, I think it's right. The eyes of the world are on this trial. Whatever happens, it's going to send a really powerful message about freedom of expression, political dissent, and the rule of law in Nigeria.
It's a crucial moment.
It really is.
It's kind of overwhelming to think about. This single legal case becomes this focal point for all these huge issues, like identity, unity, self-determination.
It's a lot.
As we move forward with this case, what should our listeners be looking out for? What are the key things to watch?
Well, I think the biggest question is whether Nnamdi Kanu will actually get a new judge.
Right.
If that happens, who will it be? And how will that impact the trial? That's something we really need to follow closely.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Anything else we should be paying attention to?
I'd say pay close attention to the legal arguments from both sides. Kanu's team is raising some really fundamental questions about the court's jurisdiction.
Right.
And the government is trying to paint him as this dangerous criminal. The way those competing narratives play out is going to be crucial.
Yeah, you can easily get lost in the legal back and forth.
Yeah.
But we can't forget that there's a real person at the center of all this. Nnamdi Kanu is a human being.
Yeah.
With his own beliefs and motivations and fears.
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in the legal and political complexities. But at the end of the day, this is a story about a man fighting for what he believes in, even if it means going up against a system that sees him as a threat.
That adds a whole other dimension to this. It reminds us that behind every headline, every court case, every political movement, there are real people whose lives are being impacted.
Right, and it's our responsibility to try to understand their stories, even as we grapple with these larger issues at stake. Yeah. There are no easy answers here, but I think we've only just begun to explore the depths of this case.
Okay, so we've really gone through it all. The legal stuff, the political tensions. It feels like we're at this crossroads now. And no matter what happens next, it's going to be huge.
Yeah, there's so much risk, so much uncertainty. Let's just think it through for a second. What if Kanu's lawyers actually succeed and get Justice Nyako removed from the case? Like, for good.
Then what?
We'd be looking at a whole new judge, probably a restart of the entire trial process, maybe even completely new legal strategies from both sides.
It would be like hitting the reset button. But what if the trial just goes ahead with Nyako? Couldn't that actually be faster?
It could be, but it could also just pour gasoline on the fire. You know, Kanu supporters already think the process is biased, and if Nyako stays on, it's only going to get louder. It's a really tough situation. The court has to be efficient. But it also needs to make sure the trial is fair, a trial that everyone sees as legitimate.
It's a tough balance. And then there's the big question, the one nobody really wants to talk about. What happens if Kanu is found guilty?
I think that's the scenario that keeps a lot of people up at night. It could easily trigger widespread protests, maybe even violence, especially among pro-Biafran groups.
It would put the government to the test.
Big time. Their ability to maintain order and keep things stable would be under immense pressure.
On the other hand, what if he's acquitted? Would that be a major victory for the Biafran movement?
Symbolically, Oh, yeah, for sure. It would likely embolden the movement even more. We could see way more calls for secession, even more challenges to the Nigerian government's authority.
So either way, it's a sensitive outcome.
Absolutely. Plus, an acquittal would force the government to confront the underlying issues. You know, the things that fuel Biafran separatism in the first place? Those issues aren't just going to vanish with an acquittal.
It's like every outcome leads to a new set of problems.
Yeah, that's the nature of these complex political and legal battles. There are no guarantees, and the consequences can be unpredictable, far-reaching.
So after all this, after this deep dive into the case, what are your final thoughts?
I think this case shows us that legal battles aren't just about laws and courtroom procedures. They're deeply connected to history, to social and political forces. Nnamdi Kanu's trial, it's like a tiny snapshot of Nigeria's struggle with questions of identity, unity, self-determination. These are huge issues.
And it reminds us that behind the headlines, behind all the legal arguments, there are real people whose lives are directly affected by these big issues.
Exactly, and we need to approach these issues with empathy, with understanding. We need to be open to different viewpoints and work together towards solutions that are just and peaceful. It's not about picking sides. It's about finding a way forward as a society.
I couldn't agree more. And as this story unfolds, I really hope our listeners will stay informed and engage in thoughtful discussions. You know, really consider the different perspectives at play. It's a complicated situation with no easy solutions. But the more we understand, the better equipped we are to have constructive dialogue.
Exactly. You know, maybe this deep dive sparks some new questions for you, some new ideas. Maybe you'll want to learn more about Nigerian history or the Biafran movement, or even just about how international law works.
That's what we're here for.
Learning is a journey, and it's never truly over.
So true.
One last thought before we wrap up. The outcome of this trial, no matter what the verdict is, will have a lasting effect on Nigeria's future.
It's true.
It's going to shape the relationship between the government and the Biafran movement. It's going to influence how people see justice and fairness. And it could even reshape the entire political landscape for years to come.
It's a lot to consider.
It is. It reminds us that the choices we make today as individuals, as a society, they can have profound and lasting consequences.
Well said. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. And as always, keep exploring the world with curiosity.empathy and that thirst for knowledge. We're so glad you could join us for this deep dive into such a complex and important issue. We really believe that understanding stories like this one is crucial. And we appreciate you being a part of the Deep Dive Africa community, but we can't do it without your support. We pour our hearts into these in-depth discussions, and every contribution helps us keep the lights on and keep the conversations going. If you want to help us keep bringing you these powerful stories and discussions, please visit our online ebook store. You can find the link below. It has a curated collection of books that explore the things we talk about here on the podcast. It's a great way to learn even more and support our mission at the same time. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode. Every share helps us reach new listeners and keep the conversation alive. You can also find us on Facebook and X, formerly known as Twitter. We've included all the links in the episode description. Thanks for being a part of the Deep Dive Africa family. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a topic that matters. Until then, keep exploring and keep the conversation going.